Hello, I am Geraldine Anello. I am your host today for this September panel on the state of theater music directors worldwide. That's when I get to speak with music directors all over the world, figuring out what's going on right now in their world, in their country, in their geographical area, as far as shows, as far as the world and everything going on with the virus or anything else politically. In these crazy times we are living right now. So all my guests today are coming from very interesting countries. We've got represented Canada, New Zealand, we've got Australia, London. I'm from France. I may speak about it. Currently in France for a couple months now. And we also have someone who's from New Zealand currently working in the US on a show. So we're going to be speaking about all of that. And my first question, as we get started, is I'm going to ask every one of our guests where they were pre-virus, pre-COVID, and what the beginning of the virus did to them in their career, what shows they were heading into that got stopped, and all of that. So let me get started with Richard from New Zealand. Hey, Richard.
Hi there, Geraldine.
Hi. So where were you?
We were actually about 2 weeks away from opening a production of My Fair Lady here in Christchurch, and so that very abruptly shut down, and I had work after that season, beginning on a season of Rent for local theatre professional production, and of course that work all stopped as well. And at this stage I would have been beginning work on the Buddy Holly story, so all of that work has ceased, even though we have been extremely fortunate here and have been able to continue some work. Things are changing all the time, so it's very hard to plan anything, hence why all those productions were cancelled.
Yeah, did people move right away into online teaching or into those virtual choirs, or where people kind of like took a break and waited out?
No, that did start happening. So we had virtual choirs coming out of our ears. I actually am fortunate enough to be working with a choir, which Matt left me when he left for the US. So we went fully into online work for that, and as you say, the videos and so forth. So we were pretty much like the rest of the world. Except I guess the point of difference was we went quite early and into a very, very strict lockdown straight away. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Richard. Let me move to Canada with Rachel. Rachel, I know you were up to something really cool with an awesome tour. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was just about to leave my hometown in Winnipeg to go music direct Billy Elliot in the next province over with a big regional production featuring all local kids, actually no bring-ins from our bigger centers. So we'd kind of been working on that for 2 years almost leading up into our production, and that did not go.
So what was that transition for you as far as where you were living and what you did in the transition?
So I had just moved out actually, and then I was about to go, travel to this next province for about 8 weeks on the show. And so then I just ended up being stuck in my apartment, not doing much.
And so you didn't move?
I didn't move, no.
That's a good option to have right there, rather than being forced to move and have no place to go, I suppose.
I for sure had a place to go. That was lucky, yeah, but hadn't done the move yet.
And no Billy Elliot. Sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's move to Australia with David. David, can you tell us about that transition for you?
Hi, yeah. So I was working a lot in community theatre when I was when COVID struck, and at the time we had just bumped in Alice in Wonderland Junior, and it was the day before we were going to open that we decided to call it off. So,
Oh,
uh, yeah, it was pretty devastating for all the kids. They were all very upset, and we've been trying really hard to see what we can do about getting them another opportunity. And so we were looking at actually coming back on in December. But yeah, it's still kind of the country's still very shut down, and it's just not practical at the moment. So we're not getting too many cases here at the moment, but there's still a lot of concern about how it's all going. Some people are thinking, oh, it's a bit too soon, whereas others are like, oh, it's not any problem at the moment. So yeah, it's all still kind of walking on the line.
yes.
But yeah, otherwise, at the time I had probably 8 gigs lined up throughout the year through to March next year. And I think the one that I've got for March is the only one that actually held on. There was one that I had booked for November, which was cancelled in about July, once they kind of realized, yeah, this isn't going to happen. So yeah, that's where that's at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, David. Let's talk about England. In London, we've got Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hi. So I had just finished a run of a new musical at the Royal Shakespeare Company called The Boy in the Dress. And we'd done our last performance and then we went into lockdown 5 days later. So we just got it done. And then I was meant to be doing Evita at the Barbican Centre all summer. And then that show, The Boy in the Dress, was meant to transfer to the West End. So I should be rehearsing it right now. And everything's been cancelled. So it was the first year for a long time I had back-to-back work and it's all gone. So yeah, hopefully some of it might happen next year. But yeah, it's been really tough.
Yeah, that feels that much harder when it's supposed to be headed to such a big level of production, I suppose.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to hear that, Laura.
That's okay. Hopefully it'll happen. It'll happen next year, hopefully. So we'll see. But it's because all the kids that were in it, their voices will have broken. So we have to completely start from scratch. Whereas
you're talking about the boys. Are you talking about the boys and the shift? Oh my goodness.
So we were going to take the kids that we had and we can't use any of them now. So we have to start that whole thing again. So
that is something I never thought about. Yeah, the children in the shows that are the specific age for the show that can no longer be cast. So for us adults, a year later is a year later. For a child, a year later means it's no longer an opportunity.
Yeah, it just happened on Matilda as well. So they got all the new kids ready for Matilda. Lockdown happened, none of them got to open, and then they can't be in the show. So by the time the show's open, they'll all be too big. So
oh goodness,
yeah, it's rough. It's really rough.
We had it hard. The children come in place. Jeez. Wow, what a perspective. Thank you for that perspective, Laura.
That's okay.
Let's look at Matt, who is in a different position at the moment, but maybe wasn't 6 months ago. So what happened for you, Matt, when everything came down?
Sure. So before the pandemic, I'd moved to the United States basically about a year before the pandemic hit, and I was working in and out of New York at regional theaters, and doing some work in the city as well. And then, of course, March happened. And in March, I was in Miami, actually. I was in Miami, Florida, as a rehearsal pianist for Royal Caribbean, the cruise company, just on the studio side, working on the land in the studios. And we were about 4.5 weeks into rehearsing Hairspray, which was about to go out on Symphony of the Seas. And we saw the news that Broadway shut down while we were in rehearsals, and we thought, oh, that's strange. Let's keep going for now. And then 2 days later, or 2 or 3 days later, we were also in the same position. So yeah, I would have only had about a week or two more left down there to finish. And that all, of course, shut down. Cruises shut down. A lot of friends lost work for the whole year. And I was meant to fly back to New Zealand and get my new visa stamped and processed, my new artist visa, which I'd just been approved for in January. And as it turns out, it was not a time to be flying back and forth between countries and trying to have a visa for coming back and forth in and out of countries. So I made the call to stay. I still had work lined up for the year, and I'm very, very lucky that quite a lot of it stayed together, surprisingly.
Wait,
so
what?
yeah, it's just, well, I had some summer theatre work that also cancelled. I was going to fly back and work straight away from going to New Zealand. That cancelled, but another theatre that I'd worked at before did go ahead with a small outdoor season in Michigan. So I was able to go there for June, July, some of August, and then moved up here to New Hampshire and did my quarantine and started working at Weather Vane Theatre, where I am now, sort of beginning of September.
You worked in Michigan for the summer in theater?
Yeah, so we had a very small outdoor theatre with just pianist, music director, no other instruments, and just 5-6 actors. And it was all spaced in an outdoor pavilion and approved. Michigan's rules were very, very strict, and still are actually. The theatre still isn't allowed to be open physically in person. So that company managed to get approval for a very small outdoor spaced, summer season.
Yeah, it seems crazy now that you said that it was in Michigan of all places. That's wild. That's wild. Well, just on that note, for me, I was about to head into a small tour of Bat Out of Hell, which I had done at City Center. And we were going to do a 2 months tour, which was maybe 2.5 months of work with the rehearsals. And same thing as you, Matt, Broadway announced closing, and 2 days later we got the call and they said, we're pushing it back. And then now there's rumors it might be next summer, but they're very much rumor and nothing in the books. And that's a bummer because it's such a fun show. We were going to have the original cast. So, but at least it's not as dramatic, I suppose, as like canceling the day before opening night, it's whatever we're doing, we feel it. But let me ask you all, one by one, what have you been doing since? How have you been working in the field? What ways have you been working in the field? What have you been noticing as far as live music around you, whether you're involved with it or not? Is there some, is there none? How are your own friends and colleagues working? Kind of anything in your own country. How is the money situation being handled by your government? So let me ask Richard that first.
Sure. Well, our country our government's really supported us very well. We've had a range of wage subsidies for almost anyone who needs it, and self-employed contractors like us were all able to access that. So that's kept us going for quite a while there was just nothing able to happen. We also got quite a bit of support from Creative New Zealand, which is our arts council, and the theatres which were funded partially by them were all supported to pay out their contractors for some work as well. So consider ourselves extremely fortunate. There's been the work with choirs. I've had quite a lot of opportunities with things like Sweet Adeline's groups, because they're so used to having international coaches come over here, and so they've started looking locally for people to help out. So found myself doing all sorts of unexpected things. We had once we came out of lockdown and had virtually eliminated the virus here for a while. That lasted about 2 months, where we functioned almost completely normally, and then there was a small outbreak which affected the Auckland area, the top of the country. So that put the country back into more restrictions. So a lot of work had started to get re-established, and then had to shut down again. just because of the small outbreak, and it's really made a lot of people quite nervous about funding large-scale events, of course. So even though it may look from the outside like we are in this very blessed position, there's still a lot of nervousness around mounting any productions. For example, the show I was working on before our lockdown, it was postponed a year, and that has since been cancelled altogether, just because they feel they can't afford to lose any more money. But a large number of New Zealanders have returned, of course, as everyone is going home at this time, and that includes a lot of fine artists who have been working on the West End or Broadway and so forth. And so one of the local companies has actually commenced a tour for which is really a concert of theatre music, which is being very much embraced by the population, as they've been starved of theatre for a while. And I had the privilege of putting that together and working on that. So it opened on Thursday night, just past, and is setting off on a 6-week tour around the country. So I'm sure that is not great news for a lot of people to think that we are actually filling theatres, with upwards of 800 people. So, yeah, we are very lucky here. The recent outbreak that we had meant that there was a 100 limit on gatherings, and there were a lot of innovative responses to that from companies who had productions going. And one of them was their interpretation of the restrictions was such that they divided a theatre into 4 rooms, 4 sections, with its own access, its own bathrooms, and so forth. And they were able to actually get a capacity of 400 out of the...
We shouldn't be surprised that creative people are being creative.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And so I think New Zealanders are known for that kind of innovation, but it was all, of course, done and sanctioned by the government. But people have been working really hard to try and do whatever they can, and of course, local productions, very small, with less risk attached to them, are still going strong here. So we've just gone back into our level 1, which is our pretty well normal phase in this lower part of the country, and the top part of the country will follow us in a few days, hopefully.
Oh, great. So let me ask you, you mentioned the 800 audience members number. Is 800 a random number? Is it a percentage of audience size? Where does it come from?
No, well, this is in this part of the country, theatres can be full and as normal as possible. So some of the larger theatres are of about that size. So we're able to get full capacity audiences. And the opening night of this show we had an audience of 800.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are they wearing masks? And then what precautions are there for the cast? Are the shows presented a smaller cast, smaller orchestra? Is it the same?
No, there are no restrictions at the moment, because we are returning test results of 0 cases.
That's a pretty good result right there.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid.
Yes. And which is where we were a few months ago, for a couple of months, and then we had this small outbreak, which put us all back into restrictions.
So there's no precautions. You're not taking fever numbers beforehand.
No.
Wow.
People are wearing masks on public transport and when they fly, and that's the only thing. And I think once the Auckland region comes into level 1 as well, we will probably be back to normal. the main risk for us is people who are returning, New Zealanders returning, and in quarantine, and that whole process, which of course means that there is still virus in the country, but it should be being managed.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that, Richard. It's giving the rest of us some hope. I love it.
Yes.
Let's look at Canada, which is also quite insulated, as I know their borders are pretty closed. What are you noticing, Rachel, is happening with shows and all of that during these few months?
So pretty much the whole country's been shut down for shows. We started to see over the summer months some smaller companies not doing musicals, but doing a little bit of theater, primarily outdoors in our summer months. Some of the bars were able to open to have some live music again for the pit musicians and other gigging musicians. We had a really good couple months as well, like New Zealand. We were starting to really go down, see really low numbers. And then unfortunately for the past couple months, they've kind of started going up again. So where I am has just added some restrictions. So we have to wear masks essentially all the time when we're outside our place of residence. The country is, we're pretty closed off to the United States. Our border is closed, but the interprovincial borders are somewhat open. And we're all so spread out. So actually kind of every province is handling it differently. We've had some good governmental support in terms of the relief benefit that went out to Canadians. That just ended after 7 months. And I know that they're looking at rejigging that for people like us, like gig workers and actors and other people who wouldn't normally qualify for unemployment insurance. So yeah, so we're seeing kind of a spread of stuff as we kind of moved through the spring and summer. It kind of seems all the bigger theaters are taking their cue off of Broadway. Some people are throwing stuff online. A few theaters in Toronto have done a fully digital season, which is really exciting to see what that can be in terms of the virtual choirs that we were seeing also. But for the most part, I think we're kind of holding off as we get through our winter.
So what have you personally been doing during this time? Have you been able to transition to teaching music online or any kind of music work, or have you completely shifted?
I've just started a little bit of teaching again as we started our school year in September. I work for both universities, so that between online and a little bit of in-person stuff, I've been able to do that. And myself and a number of other people in my community have been just doing our own music and putting it online, which has been really fun to see what everybody's kind of come up with. And apart from that, I'm actually doing a lot of training right now. I'm also an actor and singer, so I've been doing a lot of training in the downtime.
That's awesome. Congrats. Thank you for sharing all of that. Let's look back to Australia. David, how has these 6 months been for you?
Okay, so it's been pretty interesting. In terms of our government support, we don't have really any in the arts here, which is really sad. The state governments have kind of been independent from the national government. So in terms of our state, we had Create New South Wales, which I guess is similar to Creative New Zealand, who they brought out some, what are they called, grants. And so they were offering up to $5,000 for people who were registered with Create New South Wales to develop a little project or something that they complete by the end of the year that can encourage students in New South Wales to try out online learning with music. So I was fortunate to receive one of those grants, and I'm currently working on that. I'm doing a composition project, and what I'm doing with that is I'll be composing a book each month for my flute students and other flute students in New South Wales that can pay for it using the grants they get vouchers. So we get each year music students at high school and primary school can get $100 vouchers to contribute towards their music education. So whether that's private music teaching or just group ensemble stuff like music theatre. I know some theatre companies have, they're registered with Create New South Wales, so the kids in the shows can apply their vouchers for show fees and that sort of stuff. So that's all going pretty strong at the moment. But yeah, in terms of general government support for the national view, we don't really have that much. They were doing, they've brought out two support systems, which is, one is JobKeeper and another one is Job Seeker. So the JobKeeper one is for people obviously who are still working. They were for people who were working for at least a year in the same business. So the people that were doing that were able to apply for the JobKeeper. And the Job Seeker is for people who are looking for work, obviously, and so they would get a benefit out of that as well. I think it was something like $700 or something every 2 weeks, around that sort of ballpark. But in terms of the people that were doing the professional shows here, they didn't get access to any of that. One, because they were contracted, and two, because they were contracted for less than a year. So they were working, but they weren't working long enough to receive the JobKeeper benefit. So yeah, the government really didn't do anything about that. And yeah, it's kind of definitely felt like, oh, we're not really getting enough support from the government at the moment. It's been a bit depressing.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it hasn't been easy for musical theatre. It's just in general not been happening at all. We did have, there was one similar to the Canada one. We did have an online production that was produced earlier this year. I think it was called Baghdadi the musical, and yeah, that was completely done online. So I think they were all in the same house, but they had like separate rooms they were using. So one cast member, I think it was a small cast, might have been about 8 or so, I can't remember. But yeah, they were spread out between different rooms, and the music director there was had a huge setup in one room as well, where he was doing keyboards and all sorts of other percussion stuff, and yeah, he was doing all that, and yeah, it was going really well. I think they ran for about 2 weeks, and then they recorded it as well, so they offered an online get a ticket to rewatch the show sort of thing after that too. So yeah, that was really cool. But outside of that, I don't think there's been any, there hasn't been any outdoor productions that I'm aware of. There's been a bunch of cabarets going on, so there's a lot of solo singers that are doing their productions in the city, and yeah, their audiences are limited to like 20 places per cabaret or something like that per night.
That's it? 20 audience members per cabaret, but those are indoors.
Yeah, and they're in like little restaurant things. So they're doing like 3-course restaurant things while they watch this cabaret. So yeah.
So you guys have the restaurants open indoors as well?
Yes, yeah, all the businesses are open, so everyone's still able to work. We haven't got any restrictions at the moment in terms of working, so everyone's still going. We've got, I think Uber Eats and Menulog have been very popular lately, because I think all the food businesses have kind of been jumping on board with that and like, yes, we can deliver food. So I think that's been really good for the food industry.
Maybe that's the thing we need as musicians. We can deliver music. Order us. Uber music. Maybe I'm onto something, y'all.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. So I've been doing online concerts for my friends and family. So anyone overseas as well is able to watch it. I've got a lot of family over in New Zealand actually, and yeah, they're all able to buy. I'm doing online shows, and I'm doing those in drag as well, so just kind of giving them an incentive as well, saying this is not just music, this is a production, so come watch it. It's really cool. So I've done 2 of those so far. One of them, the first one that I did, was about 3 months ago, and it was for Black women in music. So I was performing music just specifically all about Black women, both Indigenous to Australia and America and all over the world. I was taking people from there. And then the last one I did was just on Sunday, and that was a Disney concert, which I did, and I dressed up as Elsa for that, which is really cool.
Yay!
Living my Disney princess fantasy. Yeah, so that was good fun. In terms of my work, I've been teaching. So teaching is my primary business. So I've been teaching for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now. And when COVID started, all of my students went online, and I had a whole online schedule, and all of my students, none of the schools were open, so they were learning at home as well. So I could pretty much teach them at any time that I wanted, which was perfect for me, because I was teaching like in the middle of the afternoon until just the late afternoon most days. So that was really good. And then about the July, we went back to full-time at school, but the music teachers weren't allowed back for a little while, and we were still teaching all of those students online, and at that point I just wasn't letting anyone home either, so I still kept the same timetable that I was operating before, except obviously all my students that were learning during school time had to come to after school time. So I'm kind of at the stage now, I'm at school 1 day a week. They've let some of the teachers come back. It's all very COVID safe. So we're wiping down instruments in between students. So I teach keyboard, obviously, and the students, I wipe the keyboard down in between they're done, and they have the hand sanitizer there as soon as they come in. There's only one student at a time, so I can't do any group lessons with them at the moment. I do have one flute student at the school, and our precautions for that at the moment is that flute students need to be 3 meters away from anybody else.
All right.
So yeah, it's a bit dramatic, because flute's the only one, I think, as far as I know, that has to be 3 meters from anybody else. And also choirs in school aren't a thing, so choirs aren't allowed to get together. Sorry, sidetracking a little bit here. The music theatre company that I was working with before with Alice, they've been really trying to push getting this back happening for them, but yeah, we're kind of a bit tentative, because obviously schools are saying no choirs, and they're saying, well, there's no rules for musical theatre, basically. So yeah, it's kind of a bit and ah between what's going on there at the moment. So yeah, kids are just, they're taking it pretty well. I think they're not too concerned, because I think we've all adapted now, and we've all, like, online lessons are their new norm, so they're kind of used to what's happening for them now too. The in-person kids, it's still a little bit different with them, because I can't sit right next to them. I have to sit like two meters away from there. It's 1.5 meters, but 2 meters is about where I'm sitting at the moment, just because of the space in the room.
Well, it's so good that like classes are happening with children. That's great.
Yeah. So the COVID's actually been really good for me in that sense, because I've actually picked up a lot more students because of it, and obviously students that I wasn't able to teach before because they were too far. Like I would travel everywhere, all around New South Wales to do the musical theatre work I was doing. So South Sydney, I was working down there, which is about 1.5 hours from where I live, and I picked up a student from there. And then there's also a couple of students in North Sydney, which is where I was doing the Alice show, and that's also.
Well, that's so great to know you're having so many new students, and things
Yeah.
are moving forward. Thank you so much, David. Let's look. Yeah.
A lot of the adults in the area as well are coming for lessons, because they're like, oh, well, I'm not doing anything else now. So like all the sports in the area is kind of picking up again now, but before it wasn't. So all of them are like, oh, I can do something. And yeah, so they've all been coming to do piano lessons now. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, David. Let's look at London. And Laura, how are things happening in London, and how have they been over the past few months?
It's kind of bleak. It's not great here. So the government are a joke here, to be honest. So they've handled the whole thing really terribly, and so we've got a massive spike right now. So there's like 3,000 new cases a day here, and so it was sort of leveling down, and they were opening lots of stuff up, and now they're just shutting everything again, but not really shutting it. So they're trying to keep the economy going, but not looking after people. So it's sort of terrible. And they haven't, so they were going to give this 1.5 billion grant to the arts, because all of the theatres had to close down. And they said they'd give all this money, and none of it's going to come until December. And because they haven't given any dates as to when anything can start again properly. So they've opened the theatres, but they've said you're not allowed anyone in them. So they've sort of opened them so they can go, well, they're open, so like, what's the matter? And most theatres in England, in the UK, do pantomime at Christmas. And it's their sort of, all the regional theatres, so those that aren't in the West End, it's their main source of income. So that's how they basically finance the rest of the year. And there's only about 6 pantomimes happening in the country this year, and so there's a lot of places.
And that's 6 out of how many usually?
Hundreds and hundreds. And so there's a lot of places now having to start redundancies with staff, and there's like whole big venues that might not make it. So it's kind of awful. And then sort of in terms of government support, they did 3 things here. So they did furlough, where they sort of paid part of people's salaries that were on a payroll. But they weren't allowed to do any other jobs. Most people in our industry are self-employed, and they did a grant for self-employed. Luckily, I got it, but they capped it. So West End musicians are just above the cap, so none of them got any support. And then there's another thing called you can be a limited company, and they didn't give any of those people any support.
Wait, did I hear that right? West End musicians did not qualify?
No one's got any support.
Why? Yeah. Is that because they made too much money, or is that
just too much money, like negligibly too much money? So there's like loads of my colleagues just haven't had anything. So there's lots of people like working as Amazon delivery drivers, working in supermarkets. There's lots, because you know they've got to pay their mortgages and stuff. So it's been really bad. And like I teach on the side all the time, so I've always kept that going. And so I've managed to take all of my teaching online, and I've been doing lots of workshops, and our exam board here that do all the music exams, I've done some consultation work for them, which has been really great. So I've sort of been able to keep afloat, but there's a lot of people who, like, in their downtime work front of house at the theatre, like that's their other job, and they can't do that. So it's been a really tough time for people.
No, you're talking about musicians who work front of house sometimes.
Yeah, so
no way.
Sometimes, like in between jobs, people do all kinds of things, or like work in bars or whatever. And there are some bars open, but there's not loads of bars open. And so yeah, it's been a really tough time for musicians and MDs, but there has been a lot of stuff going on as well. So there's been a lot of people really fighting and being very creative. So there's been big outdoor seasons of stuff, because we've got a lot of outdoor theatres here, which has been amazing to see. Like, it's been so lovely. And then we're just starting to do some limited indoor seasons. So they're doing like socially distanced shows with limited audience numbers that have to be masked, and they have to be in bubbles, because here you're not allowed to be in any groups that are larger than 6. So they'll only sell a bunch of tickets in a group of 6, and then you have to be distanced, so you can't sit anywhere near each other. So obviously one of the first shows that's going back is 6, because they're literally a bubble. So yeah, so there is some stuff going on, and there's some producers that are working super hard to get it all. Like Nika Burns, who produces lots of the big shows here, she's opening her theatres at a loss, because she's like, I just want to get it going, and I want my staff to get paid, and it'll cost me a lot of money, but I feel like I have to do that. And like, there's people like her that have been amazing. The National Theatre are doing a season, they're opening, and there's been loads of online stuff. So the Old Vic get no subsidies from the government, so they've just had to make money. So they've done like a season of plays that were live but have just been filmed. So they were like live over 2 weeks, and you paid for your ticket and stuff like that. And there's just been one a musical's just done that as well, called Romantics Anonymous. So there is a lot of stuff happening, and there's so many people fighting really hard. But we've kind of just been ignored, I think, by our government, who are sort of much more interested in serving their own interests, I think.
So you mentioned 6, and I want to go back to it, because we had Katie Richardson actually was on the July panel.
Yeah.
And she, when we did the panel, it was, we recorded on 14th of July and they were headed into doing a drive-in concert version, which the next day, the 15th of July, was canceled.
Yeah.
And now you're saying it's back on. So is that version back on the drive-in version or
so
the West End version?
They've done a drive-in version, so that did happen, but they didn't tour it. So the original idea was that they were going to tour that drive-in version of the show. But because here there's lots of places, so the government have gone, we're not responsible for it. So all the local councils of all the big cities here now decide whether to lock down their city. And what happened was that a lot of the cities that they were going to went into like local lockdown, so they couldn't do it. But because Nika's opening up her theatres again, there's now a version of the show that's going to happen in the West End, and it's gone into a bigger theatre. So 6 normally is in a tiny theatre, and she's put it into a bigger theatre that's free so that they can distance the audience and distance the girls, I think.
And so what are the rules for the distance audience? Is it a percentage of the total space or is it a maximum number?
It's only a percentage. So I think it's something like 20%. In the audience. It's not nowhere near full capacity, and here you have to get your temperature checked before you're allowed in. There's sanitizer everywhere. People have to wear masks in the audience. I think there's like, they did a big test at the Palladium, which is one of the big theatres in London, where they tried all this stuff out. So there's like one-way systems in place. But the tough thing here as well is our theatres in the West End are really old buildings. So the tiny corridors, there's no space to move. So it's about managing that, I think, as well. Whereas regional theatres are newer buildings, so they're sort of more equipped, I think, to be able to deal with distanced shows.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I also wonder about concessions. Because, you know, like it's like all the places that have indoor eating, you arrive with your mask, you take off your mask. So is that something that's getting ingrained where now you get into the theater, you sit, you take off your mask? It's like, well, now I'm seated, I'm out of maybe I'm getting my concession drink.
Yeah, I don't think they're opening the bars. I think that's quite a big thing. I think they're encouraging people to go eat in the places outside, but I'm not quite sure how it's working because I'm not doing it. So I couldn't speak in a sort of expert
I just hadn't thought about it. That it's like, theater is a whole event thing. Right? You don't just go see the show. You have your drink. It's a whole thing. I mean, so much of it. Well, yeah,
it's tough though. It's been really hard, and like the social media at the moment is so angry. So there's a lot of people. Just my timeline is I've had to only go on it once a day at the moment because it makes me quite anxious to look at it all, but there's just a lot of people that haven't been helped, and it's quite desperate situations. A lot of people leaving the industry, and it's really sad.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because in New York City, and I know for London is another big expensive city like New York, and in New York City, so many people have moved out. So many performers, not just performers, but many performers have left, give up their leases, and are like, well, maybe we'll come back, maybe we won't. Some have permanently taken teaching positions elsewhere. Some are just living at their parents. Are you noticing the same kind of large scale giving up on the city in London as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have moved back home, or there's a lot of people that have moved back to Wales. Actually, there's loads of Welsh musical theatre people. Wales is stricter than England in its lockdown measures, so a lot of people have gone back just to go, I'll be a bit safer there as well, I think. But yeah, there's lots of people that have sort of retrained and things like that. It's tough, but there is stuff happening. Drama schools have just gone back, which is interesting. So I'm doing some in-person teaching in a few weeks, and it'll be the first time that I've done anything in person since March. And their measures are so strict there. So we have to have
Right.
our temperature taken every day, and fill out questionnaires every day, and there's screens everywhere and stuff like that. So that'll be interesting, because I've got a health condition as well. I'm type 1 diabetic, so I'm slightly more at risk. So I've been really wary about, because I've been asked about a couple of projects that I would be starting now, and I'm just I'm a bit more cautious about it, to be honest.
I understand. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that, Laura. Let's
I feel like I
go
just spoke, sorry.
there's so much. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting at this point. We're seeing so many different attempts on so many different levels: university level, show level. Like a couple months ago, we could say a grand answer, and now we have to break it down for every country. We just saw it with David in Australia, and you in London, and it's true everywhere. Let's look back at the US with you, Matt. What have these few months been like for you?
Sure. So I can speak to right now. We are the first, which I was unsure that it would come through, but we were the first theatre, the Weathervane Theatre up here in northern New Hampshire. It was the first indoor theatre to be approved by Actors Equity, the National Union for Actors, which had been fairly strict, and rightfully so, because of putting actors at risk and things. So all through summer, that wasn't really given out to many theatres, aside from some outdoor theatres, and we're the first indoor theatre to be approved. And again, what I've noticed in the States more than anything is that it's so big, and the leadership has obviously been so mixed, to put it nicely, and so confusing. And so, in fact, there's not really been a lot of national leadership. So it's been down to the states or the areas. So I feel like New England kind of has its own bubble of quite strict rules and regulations. So being in New Hampshire, we're part of that New York, Connecticut, Vermont circle, and the cases have really stayed flat. And I think that's a big reason why we got approved by the union, was because of the area, the county we're in has had no active cases for many weeks, because we're so far north, closer to Canada. And we also, the company invented some really strict rules above and beyond what the state requires at, say, movie theaters. We are doing the 25% limit, so only 40 or 50 seats out of 250 something. We're doing contact tracing of the audience, taking logs of who's there and exactly where they sit. Also, temperature checks of every audience member coming in and out, masks are required. And then on the company side, and I think this is really big reason why we were approved to do, we're doing Little Shop of Horrors and Candor and Ebb's World Goes Round, like full stage productions.
Wow, you're not getting one show, you're getting two shows. Look at you.
Yeah. But we're very fortunate because the company owns a big inn. So the company owns this big inn next to down the road from this theater. And so we all live in this bubble together, and we all have our own room and bathroom. So when we first arrived, we had to do 2 weeks of self-quarantine. So we had to wear our mask as soon as we left our room, and eat separately from people for 2 weeks, and only stay on company property / the theater if we were doing any kind of tasks. And we had to sort of not do tasks for a number of days as well. So I think all of those rules that this theater has put together with the union and with the New Hampshire state has allowed that to happen. And of course, it's difficult financially, but they wanted to lead the way. And I think it's been a really good case for Actors Equity, and so that they can see how that might work going forward. There's 2 other theatres in the area over in Vermont. There's Northern Stage, where I worked at in the winter. They've been approved for a 1-woman indoor show, similar size audience. And there's another theatre in Connecticut. These 3 indoor union productions. So, and again, I think this difference between states is really, like, you see what happened in the South and Florida versus New England, you know what I mean, in terms of how the states have handled it differently. And I think in terms of union productions, I think that might have an influence about where you are and how your state's dealing with it.
Are there any kind of changes to the staging, or is staging happening as usual?
Yeah, we have certainly, like, the intimacy stuff in Little Shop of Horrors. Audrey and Seymour don't kiss in this production at all.
No.
And that was a union rule, I believe. But there are other elements of staging which are, because we have all been living together, and there's the testing and medical exams and things, and the bubble
What
that
about
we
the
live in.
dentist? What about the dentist scene?
Yes, he's certainly not right up in the mouth like, he possibly normally would be.
He's a dentist of the foot. Like, he's such a bad dentist. We've taken him to a whole other level of comedy.
The mask has a whole other layer.
Yes, it does.
But I'm very, very lucky and blessed, and to be doing it. And and The World Goes Round is obviously more of a review anyway. It's not really involving personal touching much at all. But it is staged, and there is choreography and things. Yeah.
But are there rules surrounding what staging, besides for the kiss, what staging is allowed and not allowed, or is it up to each individual director?
I think because of the nature of our company rules about the quarantine and the living situation, and we don't interact at all front of house. We aren't allowed to even step past the edge of the stage, on a show day, etc. So because of all those protections, I think there has been some more flexibility, but they've been fairly strict on any kind of direct, touching of like faces and mouths and things. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to speak a little bit for France because I am both an American citizen and a French citizen, and I've been in France for a couple of months. So what I've been noticing in France is there's been it's mostly been open for 3 months. The whole summer has been open, bars and stuff, indoors as well. There's been some restrictions put in over time with masks outdoors you have to wear when you're in big cities. But as far as live music is concerned, there's been some outdoors. So there's been, the bands mostly are okay. It's like if you're in a band, you can play outdoors. There's some limits to how many people can come, but they are able to go. Also, quite early on, there's been some live TV shows or just recorded TV shows with musicians that are at a distance from each other. So that's been kind of going on. There's 2 status for musicians here. There's one where you're just a freelancer, but if you do enough gigs in a year, you have a special artist status, and that gives you access to unemployment, which is really good, gives you access to free healthcare, lots of stuff like that. So what the government did for those people that were on this status already was to extend automatically that status for an extra year, because you get that status for 1 year. And so they were like, okay, you're not going to work this year, so we're extending it for a year. So it gave people an extra year of unemployment, which a lot of those people are in Paris because it's a very centralized system, but they had that. Now the situation is dramatically changing right now as cases have risen dramatically the past few weeks. Big restrictions are in place now. You have to wear a mask at all times. Bars in big cities are closing at 10 p.m. Alcohol is not to be sold after 8 p.m. To go. So everybody's kind of expecting things to get worse and worse here. Schools are in session in person. So conservatories, university teaching is in person with a mask. How long that will be for remains uncertain, but that's kind of the situation in France. There are some talks about some big shows that were pushed back to November, December that are still set to be happening. Will they? It's very no one really knows right now. So that's kind of where we're at. Let's look at quickly what you're looking at in your countries for the future. What kind of things are in the works, maybe not, as far as productions, money, things like that. Richard, let's start with you.
Well, I'm happy to say I'm starting work on a show in a couple of weeks. Production of Jersey Boys, which has all but sold out already. Because people are so keen to get back to something. The company is taking quite a risk, as are any other companies in the country who are beginning to come back, because we've just experienced this extra outbreak which put everyone back into level 2 restrictions. So there's a lot of gambling going on in that sense, for companies who are wanting to stage more large scale productions. So that audience is around 390, I think, for Jersey Boys. So I guess if things revert, then they will be subject to some restrictions for that audience size, but will, I guess, keep going rather than cancel, but with restrictions. So there is another company planning an Auckland and Wellington season of the same production of Jersey Boys, and that is just going to auditions. So people are behaving as if next year will be a kind of normal year, although we've had one sort of warning shot that things will go up and down, and we have to be prepared to move backwards and forwards between levels. And so people are doing their planning in order for that to be possible, or they're just staying right out of the game until they feel it's going to be a sure thing, because so many people have lost so many jobs and so much finance on these productions, of course. So it's very optimistic. We all feel very optimistic because we're now back in this normal kind of feeling, but there's a lot of caution also about that, and we certainly don't take it for granted. As Laura said, the drama schools here are starting to go back, universities and so forth. They're starting to produce shows with smaller audiences, of course, and so that has given a bit of a shot in the arm to the industry, and so musicians and music directors have been able to continue where it's related to educational outcomes. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Richard. Rachel, how is the future looking like in Canada?
I think the future here, I think there's a lot of hope. Like Richard was saying about moving in through this season and next season, like I think people are really looking forward and doing a lot of planning. But I also think that there's a lot of uncertainty within the country about what can be done. So, you know, now things are getting canceled through the winter. I think people are hoping that their spring shows might hang on, spring, summer, kind of waiting to see on a vaccine. But like Laura was saying, you know, even if they open the theaters right now or in 2 months, would audiences want to go? I don't think the audiences are really ready for that. So I think people are just really looking to be creative and continue with this online and the concerts. The schools have started to come back. Most of the universities are operating online. I'm not sure about the drama programs. But one thing that has come back is film. So a lot of the actors who work in theater and in film have been able to go back on set. So there's some of those productions that are rolling. But in terms of theater, yeah, cautious and uncertain, but hopeful, I think, for what the coming year brings.
Cautious but uncertain and hopeful. Oh, I love that. That might be the tagline for this September panel. David, please tell us about the future in Australia. Our show's coming back.
Yes, they are, and it is looking very bright for the shows that we are getting back. I've actually, I've launched my own junior theatre company, which is planning to start productions next year. So we're looking at doing a concert in around April, and then start looking at proper theatre productions towards the end of the year next year. In terms of the community theatres, there's a bunch of companies that are like the same as the other one. They were all like, next year is looking very positive and they're all going ahead as normal pretty much. And in terms of professional theatre, we have Pippin the Musical is opening at the end of November to full-scale audiences. So we've got 2 massive theatres here in Sydney, which are about 2,000 seat capacities, and they are opening the full house for both of those shows. As far as I know, Pippin's not selling very well, but we do have Frozen that is opening a week after that.
Nobody saw that, but when you said that, Rachel laughed because that's what she was talking about, that we may open the theaters, but will the audience be there? We're not sure. Yeah. And you're holding part of that answer.
Yeah. So we have Frozen opening a week after that, and that's opening in our other big theatre, and the sales for that are going much better. There's not, I think, I was looking at the ticket sales last night, so I could talk about it here, but I think the opening show had about 6 or less than 10 seats left in the 2,000 capacity for the opening show. So yeah, Frozen is selling really, really well. We've also got Come From Away lined up, which is opening straight after Frozen, but that's not till June, July next year. So yeah, otherwise, I think in general it's looking very positive for where we're headed.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, David. I couldn't help but think if people are not signing up for Pippin, but for Frozen, it's because COVID doesn't bother them anyways. Anyways, I had to, I'm sorry. Laura, London.
I think here it feels like everyone just thinks it'll all be done with by the spring. That's how it feels. So there's loads of shows that are like everything that's been delayed is starting again in the spring. I sort of feel whether we're vaccinated or not, to be honest, which is really hopeful. So I think everyone, and it's sort of every time something else happens, like, so there's a big production of Hairspray happening here in the West End next year. And they did a preview on Britain's Got Talent, which I'm sure there's some version in everywhere that you guys live. And the love for it that was online was just amazing. And I think people are desperate to go back and be entertained and have a great night and not think about what's going on in their lives. So yeah, it does feel like people are trying to be really, really positive, even though it might not feel like we have a lot of support. There's a lot of stuff happening in our regional theatres and sort of the places that produce stuff outside of London as well. So there's loads of people really pushing for things there. Film has gone back here, like Rachel was saying. So my partner works on film sets, and the measures there are so strict, but those big film studios can afford to test everyone that works on set 3 times a week. So like, which I don't think that would be feasible in a theatre situation. And recording studios have gone back here. So there's been a lot of stuff happening in Abbey Road and Air Studios and things like that. So yeah, I think things are happening. We've just found out today the Olivier's are going to happen virtually. But there's going to be a virtual ceremony, but they're actually going to happen. So that was really cool. And there's been a big thing today about, so the major problem here has been about insurance. So getting insurance to protect shows from just closing again. And they've just adjusted our like force majeure clause here today. So that just was in the news today. So hopefully that makes it a bit easier to get some stuff on as well, I think. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's sort of the same, cautiously, hopefully, hopeful and optimistic. I think everyone's desperate to just get back doing it again. So myself included.
Yes, we all are. And just so I because I do not want to have the final word, I will speak for my situation quickly before handing it to you, Matt, to finish this. For me, as I speak with my friends in the US, because my home is New York, a lot of my friends have been back teaching in person in New York City with a mask. They're not all working, but there's a lot more reports of people working, even if not as much as before. We ran a poll in the Theater Music Directors group. It turns out, to my own surprise, most people are working in music, not as much as before, but they are. For me, I am in talk to doing a workshop mid-October in New York City with the working, writing team to advance the show, and then shoot it on camera, distance level, no audience, but with the goal for it to advance to next stages in the spring. So things are kind of moving. They are moving. And that leads to some hope, I think so as well. So that's what I'm witnessing back in New York City. So now, Matt, what are you witnessing from New Hampshire outside of your show and your friends and colleagues? What's the future like for you?
Yeah, I know it's been a super crazy year in the US, certainly, like truly crazy. But again, I think cautiously hopeful is the word. I mean, I know there's going to be a big election in November, and that will be very important. But also, just in theatre itself, seeing the joy of doing it again with people, seeing the audience or hearing the stories of audience members, like how they reacted to coming again in these areas that are less affected and where the restrictions are really strong. I think people are busting to get back to it, and the joy of doing it again has been amazing. The companies I've worked with have been, though, this cautious thing of knowing that things could, get restricted again in the short term. They've been recording. So Actors Equity, the unions allowed some more recording than usual. We've done these performance captures that we can put up over the winter. The previous company did captures of our outdoor season that they could put up in the fall because Michigan still doesn't let theatres be open. So in that area. So I think hopeful and optimistic. I'm moving back to New York after this contract because that's becoming my home as well. I've been based out of there for 1.5 years, and I don't see why we can't keep trying it. And again, I actually do feel very safe in this part of the country in the US. I wouldn't want to be moving to Florida right now or doing cruise things again anytime soon. But I think New England and New York, just from living and experiencing work and life here, it seems to be people are very sensible, following the rules because they've experienced it in the cities nearby. So yeah, I think hopeful and optimistic. I see that the Music Man's put up their new billboard for the Broadway revival with Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster. So whether that's the spring or whether it's later in summer next year, but at least things are, again, people are being hopeful and putting things forward,
Love it. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everyone for this surprisingly uncertain yet hopeful panel. So that's September for us. Can't wait for the next month. But until then, everyone stay safe. Thank you everyone for participating in this, sharing your experiences in your countries, and keep up the good work as work is happening, which is awesome. Thanks everyone.